Okay. I'm going to talk tonight about an ancestor of mine I didn't know about until very recently, General Washington Johnston. Uh, he lived from 1776 to 1833. He was born while his father was serving as a captain in the colonial, or excuse me, in the Continental Army. And I'm pretty sure that and the fact that his family lived very near George Washington contributed to his name. And I'd like to start with why I didn't know he was my ancestor. There was a legend in the family. Great-grandma said her father, John Leveron, was raised by strangers because his father, John Baptiste Leveron, conceived him during an affair with a beautiful Native American woman who died in childbirth. His father's white wife hated the baby, so it was raised in another home. This was all a myth. I found out almost as soon as I started doing genealogy that the Catholic Church recorded that John Leveron was born on exactly the same day his death certificate says, and that very day he was baptized in the Catholic Church, which was just down the street from his parents' house. And that his mother was Susanna Johnston and his father was Jean Baptiste Leveron. And I thought, that kind of blows the dad was out trapping and met a Native American woman. I think maybe grandma read too many romances that featured French trappers and Native American women. Because there's no way they could have got the baby from some distant village after the mother died in childbirth and got it baptized on the day of its birth. But I looked at the name Johnston and thought, I'll never find those people. And I kind of dropped that. And then I saw in the county history that there were a family called Johnstons that lived nearby. And one of them was this Robert Johnston, whose father was GW. And I still thought, GW, we don't know what that stands for. And Robert, well, that's a pretty common name. And I went on to other things because honestly, the French people in my genealogy, like Jean-Baptiste Leveron, are a lot easier. And I didn't come back to it for a while. But it was clear, it was already clear that it was wrong. And it looked to me like John was orphaned, that his parents had died when he was still young. And that is indeed what was the case. If you look in this ancestry tree here, you will see in the middle of all of these French people, there's let's see, one of the Leverons, I don't remember, up at the top, and then Pierre Cartier and Veronique Mallet and Josette Tremblay and Francois Vacher and Francois, I'm not sure how to say her name, Delore, and the Vachers and the Godairs, all these French people. And then there's General Washington Johnston right in the middle. And he came to Vincennes and married the French. And in fact, he married into some of the more prominent French families, and his son married a descendant of the Godairs, and the Godairs are the folks who made George Rogers Clark's battle flag. So that fit him right in there with the French. But the mysteries don't stop there. he was an early Indiana legislator, and I'll get into that more later. There are several published biographies. Two written in the earliest 20th century really reflect the prejudice of their age. And if you know much about the 1920s, you know that the Klan was very powerful here. And I was originally, at one point, because of a family funeral, I was going to do this from Shake Library. And Curtis Shake was one of the people that wrote a biography of him. And I happen to know, because I worked in that library, that Shake was probably a Klansman. The Klan in Indiana in the 20s hated Catholics more than anybody else, Catholics and immigrants. And they were pretty hard. Any history written by people who were sympathetic to them is pretty hard on the French and Vincennes, and lays at their feet just about everything that went wrong in early Indiana. And following that model, these fellows got a lot wrong about General Washington. But they do have some excellent clues. They followed his family tree and found his descendants who were living at the time up to grandchildren, which allowed me to further connect them to my family, because these were the brothers of Susanna, who was my third great grandmother. She was not mentioned, and I think that's probably because she died about 30 years before that. Well, more than that, she died about 60 years before that. The boys lived to be quite old. So it is agreed upon and well documented that General Washington Johnston was born in Culpeper, Virginia, near the boyhood home of George Washington in 1776. He wasn't very far from Ferry Farm. It's also agreed upon by his biographers and the research I've done that his family supported the American Revolution very strongly. And his father served as I said, a captain. It was a second lieutenant in the Spotsylvania County, Virginia militia. He became a captain, I believe, in a Kentucky militia. And they cursed their kid with the name General. I have been concerned that that might have also been the dog's name, because to me, it's a dog name. It is not a people name. And so I call him GWJ more often than General, because it's just a weird name, but there it is. His line may be traceable to the lords of the Johnston clan from Scotland. That's what his is generally held by his biographers. I don't really have any way to prove that, but considering that his family came to Virginia and was almost instantly pretty successful and had very elaborate educations, they probably did arrive in this country with money and education. Also, they had titles. We know that there is one, I think we can reliably trace him through baptismal records to Sir Edward Johnston, but I can't figure out who Sir Edward's parents are, and nobody who's putting up a guess online is giving any sort of documentation. But if any of them are right, General Washington may be the third great grandson of the first Earl of Hartfell. He spent his life fighting for political causes, and that kind of follows with what we see in the Virginia Johnstons. At least one and maybe two of them served in the Virginia House of Burgess, which is kind of like the state legislature in the colonial period. His great-grandfather Johnston was likely an early immigrant to the Virginia colony, almost certainly born in Scotland. His grandfather was likely Sir William Johnston of the Virginia House of Burgess. His father, Benjamin Johnston Sr., came to Louisville not long after the Revolution. He was already friends with the Clarks. He served in various political capacities in early Louisville. You notice politics is a theme with this bunch. the family history of Dorothy Jones, General Washington Johnston's mother, is a bit murkier. Researching Joneses is really fun, I'll tell you. There are quite a few of them. She may be related to George Washington's political advisor, Gabriel Jones. She definitely is the daughter of a Gabriel Jones, but I don't think it's him, but perhaps a cousin. The dates of his will don't match up with Gabriel Jones, the well-documented presidential advisor. But it would make sense that she was from another big Virginia family, landowning family, because that's kind of who married landowners, as other landowners. And General was orphaned at the age of 17. His parents basically came out here and passed away, but the tragedy didn't seem to slow him down. It's important to also notice his siblings. One sister, Susan, married a fellow named Davis Floyd, who we've all heard of, and became very well known for her good punch at her parties. Brother William built a brick house on a farm he called Cave Hill, and that is in Louisville. It is what you think it is. Brother James attended William and Mary College in Virginia, and he served under General Clark. Sister Marianne married Major John Harrison, who is, most people agree, is the son of Charles Harrison, who is the brother of Benjamin Harrison. Charles is the uncle of William Henry Harrison. I want to make it clear, John is his cousin, not his uncle. The Harrison's first child has a story that many of you from this area may have heard. According to the history of Ohio counties and their cities, Mary Ann Johnston and Major John Harrison married at Louisville in early 1787, and later that same year, Mary Ann gave birth to a daughter, Sophia. Because Louisville was under attack by Native Americans, when Mary Ann entered labor, the family fled to Fort Clark, constructed 2 years earlier, according to Carl Kramer. And Sophia is among the first babies born in Clarksville. So I couldn't believe it. I have a cousin born in Clarksville. At the time, the place boasted 8 homes, according to Kramer. And there's the approximate location of Fort Clark is over in the far left-hand side of this picture, about where it's at, around where it says Clark Place. This is an 1848 map of Clarksville. Clark County historian Jeannie Burke told me Sophia's story first before I found it documented elsewhere. She also told me she learned several things about the family from a sampler sewn by Sophia, who grew up to marry Indiana's first Secretary of State, Robert New. The family connection seemed all the more likely considering that GWJ gave his son, my 4th great-grandfather, the name Robert New Johnston. And they do tend to, all through, their close associates' names are borrowed for their family members, all through that family's history up until my great-grandfather was orphaned. DNA results confirm my family's relationship to the living descendants of Sophia's parents, Mary Ann and John Harrison. And here's the sampler, which is located in the Clarksville, Indiana Town Archives. Or actually, it's a photo of the sampler. So here's a portion of it, and you see it gives all kinds of names and birth dates and marriage dates. It's pretty cool. Great. It's amazing about documentation that's out there for this bunch. Somewhere, it's widely agreed upon, General Washington Johnston learned French. He spoke fluent French. He is reputed to have argued cases in both French, English, and Latin, or excuse me, all three, French, English, and Latin before the courts. He was allowed to address French people in French and translate because the judges trusted his judgment and trusted his honesty. I find that remarkable because I don't trust his honesty, having learned more about him perhaps than they did. And he certainly had some Latin. He became a lawyer, and we'll get into that more later, but he got an unusually aristocratic education for the time. We always think of our ancestors at that time as probably being illiterate, and I presume mine were all illiterate, but we don't know exactly where he studied, but we know he wrote beautifully in 2 languages or more. I've not found anything he wrote in Latin, but he definitely wrote in English and French. And he left his family's Kentucky home to seek his fortune in French-speaking Vincennes around 1793. Like many people with a little money, his family had engaged in land speculation. I found a bunch of deeds here in the Clark County deed book that were his brothers and sisters and father buying up land on this side of the river and selling it at a higher price. Through that, they rose to prominence in Louisville and southern Indiana. He studied with a lawyer, and it was actually John Harrison in Louisville before he began his adventures in Indiana. Vincennes was a well-established town by the time he arrived. It dated to sometime between 1702 and 1732, depending upon who you consult. So it probably seemed to be the place to go to a young man seeking his fortunes. It was a new frontier. It was just beginning to be the territorial capital, even though it had some civilization to recommend it. And there were no other lawyers there. It needed a lawyer and it needed a notary. Lacasson, how you say it differently down here? Lankisank. Well, Michel Lacasson became one of his good friends, possibly before General Washington Johnston headed to Vincennes, depending upon what account you read upon about when they arrived in Indiana. Jeannie Burke reports that Lacasson described his friend General Washington Johnston as 4'10" with black hair and a deep affection for dance. My brother immediately said, well, there's where we get it from. I'm really short. A bunch of my family members have dark hair, and everybody loves to dance. So there we go. Lacasson is buried in Clark County, but he died in Vincennes. And I've wondered whose house he was at when he died. His will was probated there. I've been able to find out nothing else about him, but his body was sent down here for burial. Neither area was very populous at the time, and I would think that they had to be, if they knew each other in both places, they had to be pretty darn close, because there was just no way not to live close to one another if you had a house in Vincennes or in Clark County. And I do have it from Jeannie that General Washington did maintain a house down here. This is the will of Lacasson. Just threw that in because it's pretty. Politics was in General Washington Johnston's blood. Down both of his family lines, running for office was as normal as breathing. So it's no wonder they named him after a fellow Virginian, an iconic politician. And it's interesting to me that many of his descendants entered politics without knowing about their illustrious founding era ancestors. In fact, while my grandmother was saying her father got his black hair from the fictional Indian mother, her brother was running for and won back to the family the seat that General Washington Johnston occupied in the Indiana House of Representatives. Shirley Leveron was Knox County's representative for quite some time, and her father was a county official almost his entire adult life, despite the disadvantages of growing up orphaned. I think that the secret that one of the secrets of his success is that he probably didn't really care what church he went to as much as a lot of people think colonials did. He settled in Vincennes, a French Catholic town. And I grew up not really liking the Virginians. I considered them something of invaders because I'd always heard stories growing up about how the Virginians came and they did things like tie French people to the backs of horses and drag them to death. And so I grew up thinking they were awful, but he settled right in. And I think that considering that almost all his family baptismal records appear in Episcopalian churches, and then that he found the secret to winning over French Catholic voters was very simple. He converted. His biographies are always surprised he went over those French Catholic voters, but they needed to look in the parish register, which is where I started, because I was knew that I thought all my ancestors were French Catholics for a long time on my mother's side, and while the Catholics don't mention baptizing him, I find no baptismal record for him at all. He appears in many other contexts to have lived as a practicing Catholic. So that's how he went over the French. He went to church with them. So his Catholic hating biographers missed it, because I don't think they would have considered that an Episcopalian and a Mason, he's also a Mason, would have done that. But I'm pretty sure to him it seemed like a natural move. It doesn't seem to have caused his family to distance themselves from him. I think that they probably thought it was perfectly normal for him to make a change in church, if that's where you went to church with the movers and the shakers in Vincennes, then you went there, even if it was Catholic. This building dates to 1826, St. Francis Xavier, the old cathedral. This is the interior. I don't think it could have changed a whole lot since he knew it, because that particular building is the one that he would have known. And it's a very traditional Catholic interior with a brick exterior. Here it is. And the Vincennes he would have known had a crumbling Fort Knox and a crumbling Fort Sackville and a newly built Fort Knox, very near the old cathedral, and he lived about 6 blocks from all of them. And there's a railroad track where he lived now, so that's all gone, but didn't get a good picture of that. But it makes sense that he would have gone to church there. It was a very large structure, very well attended. And he married a French Catholic woman. His first bride, Josephine Tremblay, came from a titled French family. Her father is listed in most records as Sir Francois Tremblay, so they had some sort of minor title. They were landholders. Together they had at least six children. I'm still kind of working on that. before Josephine died an untimely death in 1816. She's only 36. And raised among French speakers at the old French church. His children married French neighbors and likely spoke French well. Vincennes retained French as a second language until the mid-20th century. All of the great-grandchildren of GW through which I am descended seem to have been farmed out to relatives. The relatives were all granddaughters of General Washington Johnston, and most of them were married to Frenchmen. And I know that one of the Frenchmen to whom they were married was later interviewed by the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, about the folklore, and they had to send a French speaker to talk to him because he did not want to tell Indiana folklore in English, and I don't know if he could. Let's see, that was Vital Boucher. General Washington Johnston was a lawyer, a legislator, and a Speaker of the House. He was the first person to pass the Indiana bar exam. He was a member of the Territorial General Assembly and the House of Representatives. He was Speaker of the House of Representatives one time. He was responsible for persuading the General Assembly to oppose slavery. He was responsible for a bill forbidding the sale of liquor to Native Americans. He wrote the first compilation of the laws of Indiana. He was Indiana's first Attorney General. This is from the State Library. It's a transcription of an earlier document and cites several things pertaining to General Washington Johnston, but he was the first Attorney General of Indiana. He also ran for Lieutenant Governor and lost. But his greatest work was a compend of the laws of Indiana. It recorded the progressive ideas of our early Indiana legislators. You know, we had a pretty amazing first Constitution. And this was in a book format that could be distributed to local officials. I am really looking forward to the end of the pandemic so I can go to Indiana University's Law Library and hold a copy in my hands. It's out there, but it's also digitized fully. He is considered the founder of the Masons in Indiana, and the Masonic Order of Indiana put this monument to him in Vincennes. The Masons during the founding era were a progressive group. They advocated for freedom of religion and other civil rights, at least civil rights for some people. And officially, being a Mason and a Catholic was not possible. Supposedly, Catholics caught practicing Masonry were to be excommunicated, un-Catholic. This did not happen in Vincennes. A lot of I'll say at least several of the early Masons I have looked up were also attending the Catholic Church. I imagine that news that they weren't supposed to be Masons and Catholics failed to reach the ears of the priest in Vincennes, or he just didn't care to enforce anything, or they bought a really nice stained glass window and he said, oh well. But it works about as well as you know, any other ban that religions have. There are always people that are going to break it, and always people that don't know that it's against the rules. But it is beyond the comprehension of his biographers that he's Catholic. But he was. He was a college founder. He was a founding member of the Vincennes University Board of Trustees alongside William Henry Harrison and others. He sought to protect the French inhabitants of Vincennes from other factions in the state. They were going to take the French common lands away from them and use that to build the college. And the French used their common lands as sort of a garden space for the people in the city. They had a really traditional French village sort of lifestyle where everybody had some garden space. And he stopped the seizure of that space, and they took other lands. The college became the 16th college in the nation, offering courses in Latin, Greek, and other languages, as well as other baccalaureate studies until 1889. It's now offering a bachelor's again, but it became a junior college about at that point. He was also a kind of a troubling guy. He was one of those people that would do the wrong thing if it still followed the letter of the law. He knew it was wrong to force people to work without pay. He said so in front of the House of Representatives of Indiana, in front of the General Assembly. But he did it anyhow, if he could get away with it. He purchased a 20-year indenture for Mary Clark, a formerly enslaved woman of color, from his nephew, Benjamin Johnston Harrison, Sophia's brother. Mary was forced to sign that indenture with the probably with the threat of being sold down in the deep South if she didn't accept it. So she had, she signed the indenture, she might live long enough to be free. At the risk of their lives, Mary Clark and attorney Amory Kinney challenged the indenture. This Indiana Supreme Court freed her from General Washington Johnston, ending the practice of calling enslaved people in Indiana indentured. That basically it was just a polite overlay. They were really enslaved. They give people indentures in Indiana for as long as 99 years. And obviously nobody's gonna outlive that indenture. So Johnston himself had argued that that practice was against the Northwest Ordinance, so he kind of got what was coming to him. But he tried slavery by another name. Anyhow, he was, I guess I already said he was a lawyer, but he had several political offices that were more minor. He held several local officers, including Vincennes postmaster, Knox County commissioner, Knox County treasurer, clerk of the territorial court, when it was really tiny. If your ancestor lived in early Indiana, you should check out Indiana Memory, which is a website featuring digitized historical materials. You can just Google Indiana Memory, and then in it, use the search bar to put your ancestor's name in. You can see if GW sued your ancestor or vice versa. I think there were 12 pages of results. He sued everybody. He was a mess. But he also knew and corresponded with presidents, including James Madison, Zachary Taylor, and William Henry Harrison. He managed to be well respected despite just being a mess. I cannot emphasize enough how slinky he looks if you read all these start reading these lawsuits, and he's suing everybody for everything, every advantage he can get. He was also a party guy. I think that's one reason why he was still liked and respected. He and Davis Floyd were both guys that knew how to throw a party. And in Vincennes, Louisville, and down here in Southern Indiana, he had a reputation for partying. Locke Assange noted that he loved to dance. Other writers noted that he loved to dance. And we can presume that it was a family trait because his sister was also noted for being a fine hostess. Both the old cathedral and the Bible record of George Washington Johnston preserve birth information for his first wife and their children. I'm not sure that they are all recorded. I'm still kind of working on that. People can forget to record things in their family Bible. And I have found some indexing errors in the parish register. So, but there were at least 8. After his death, he married Elizabeth Harvey, wife of his friend Parmenas Beckus, who was another early Hoosier politician. Captain Beckus is another one whose biographers do not seem to note that he is Catholic, but he is. I found several Catholic records regarding him. And General Washington Johnston died in 1833 and was buried in Vincennes among the French Catholic friends whom he'd spent his entire adult life. Here's a page from his family Bible. It is at the Indiana State Library. The Bible is another thing I can look forward to when we no longer have travel restrictions and all that fun stuff happens. And I wanted to give you a few resources for researching early Virginians. Of course, Ancestry and Family Search, the Virginia Historical Magazine, Colonial Records of Virginia, which is a book, Journal of the House of Burgesses of Virginia, which is a book, Cavaliers and Pioneers, Abstracts of Virginia Land Patents and Grants, which is a book. Minutes of the Council of the General Court of Virginia, the Virginia Company of London, Old Dominion in the 17th century, the records of the Virginia Land Company and the Virginia Colonial Decisions. For Kentucky, of course, Ancestry and Family Search, the Kentucky Biographies Project, which is a website. The biographer, I need to take a drink. 1 second. Biographical Encyclopedia of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, a book of historical boundaries, the Filson Club, the National Sons of the Revolution Library, and the History of William and Mary College, a provisional list of alumni of William and Mary College, and the William and Mary Library archives were all resources that I used. I didn't mention that I called the archives to find out if he learned his Latin and French there. They tell me that the records from the time when he could have possibly been there were burned. So there are no direct records of his attendance in college. So we can only hope that someday a letter surfaces or something of that nature. And that's all I have. Very glad to see you all. At least I see your names in the list here. So.